may want to know that the bill proposes guidelines on how to integrate climate change mitigatory and adaptation strategies into the country's development planning and budgetary process. And it also underscores a government's commitment to the Paris Agreement. And of course, the President highlighting the need to ensure homegrown solutions to the fight against climate change. And he did call on the youth to lend their brilliant minds and energy towards coming up with creativity and innovation to build our climate resilience. And as well, he challenged the captains of industry to transform Zimbabwe into a hub with cutting-edge technology.
Yes, and also so next year I can expect through the Ministry of Finance, of course, it will be bigger, and I won't say better because we've been doing very well for 3 years, but it will be bigger, and we'll be looking now not just at Zimbabwe, but possibly even regional and global issues so that we can come up with a position as Zimbabwe and the region in terms of action, depending on what we're talking about in our theme next year. Without further ado, we're now moving into our panel discussion. Now, we are running a bit behind time, and we have got quite a large panel, so I'll ask that if we do open up the floor, when we do open up the floor for questions, please introduce yourself, your organization, and stick to the question. Just say your question very quickly, or your comment very quickly, because we don't have enough time to really have sort of long conversation. So without further ado, let me call the panel, and then I'll finally call the chair. I'd like to call upon Gibson Chigumira, please, if you can, Dr. Chigumira, to come up to the podium. And as they come up, of course, you know my protocol. You clap for them. I'd like to call upon Theo Mpofu and Tinotenga Kambasha, who's the new CEO of the National Venture Capital Company of Zimbabwe. Please, a big round of applause for them. Also, Victor Steenberg from the World Bank. Jimmy Silos, of course, he's the economic advisor for CZI. And of course, Dr. Karen Pinguini, please will you come up to the podium. And of course, I will now leave you in the capable hands of the chair of this panel, Professor Chakravarti, of course, who is the senior advisor to the Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs. Please, a big round of applause. It's hard to walk up here. Yeah. Keep clapping, keep clapping, keep clapping. Thank you.
Discussions. So, without further ado, let me hand over to the panel and just say that you have 2 or 3 minutes each, and then we are going to open it to the floor for question and answer. So, over to you.
Thank you, Prof. gentlemen. I'll look at the paper that was done by Dr. Masiandima from the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. Just to add that this model that has been used for this analysis, the DIGNAT model, is a very new model that has been done by the IMF and applied to about 70 countries worldwide. So it's a new model, but I think there's confidence in it because it's a very comprehensive model, like it has those blocks that you mentioned, the supply side, the demand side, and the policy side, and it's very comprehensive in looking at the household sector, the sectors up to national level. Maybe just to bring it closer home, Madagascar has already produced a technical paper which uses this same model. I'm just mentioning that just so that since it's a new model, maybe people may not be sure whether it can really work for Zimbabwe. But other countries like Ghana and a few others are trying the model, including much closer home, Rwanda. They've started working on this same model, but they are in the preliminary stages. But Madagascar has already published a paper on this same model. Some of the issues that I got from this, the model is quite comprehensive, and I think the author should be applauded for that, and even the data that was used is from authentic sources. I think we can rely on this model with confidence. Maybe he could have also looked at maybe doing a panel with countries that are closer to Zimbabwe, since I think in the literature they had looked at quite a number of other countries. Some of them may not be very similar to our country. One of the issues that I picked, which I think maybe, because I think even the president took this climate, whatever bill, very seriously. I think this study or this analysis is going to be taken forward from what I from what I got. So I think one of the issues that really needs to be looked at is the issue of weather issues, like the presentations that we had yesterday. I think a study like this one that Dr. Masiandima presented there has to be collaboration between the policymakers, people who produce data, and the weather people. Maybe in economics we don't usually work with weather people, but I think their inputs are very critical, and I'm hoping that going forward as we follow up on these issues, we'll continue to work with them. Because, for instance, one of the issues that is there in Dr. Masiandima's paper is that when you look at the contingent fund, there is a point where they are saying that maybe when you start implementing that fund, initially there may be challenges which may produce negative results or squeeze the fiscal space which we are actually trying to, which is the problem that we are trying to address. And then maybe when you have that, other people who don't understand these dynamics may think maybe you have just given us something that does not work. So there will be need for early warning systems in place, in my view, so that as we embark on this, because in all those scenarios, those graphs that you were showing, some of the things that came out were that the dynamics would take a certain form before a disaster occurs. And this is where we need the weather people and other forecasters, early warning signals. And then there are things that will happen during the disaster and things that will take place after the disaster. So in doing this modeling, economic models and so on, we cannot do without collaborating with weather people and other people that can give us the signals, because all this is to do with climate, and these economic models will definitely rely on the information that we will get from the weather people and others who give these early warning signs. And I think from his presentation, really, there is no doubt, and I think there is general consensus that Zimbabwe is at risk climate change. And I think that is good because it means that when there's general consensus about an issue, I suppose all stakeholders are going to move in the same direction. The conversation is going to continue. And more importantly, I think if we continue that way, then implementation is going to be much easier. But what I would conclude on this paper is that, as I'm sure when, for example, there was mention of this bill that will be coming up, I suppose that there will be consultations across institutions, and then maybe papers like this one can also be shared or discussed in some forum and so on, so that maybe even when that bill is
Madam,
crafted...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we are short of time.
Okay.
So can you please move on to the comments on the next paper?
Okay, on the
Thank
next
you.
paper on fiscal costs of... on the first paper, I think I don't have too many issues on the methodology. I think they used authentic models, like the Kagan model, the VAR models, and so on and so on. And I think the paper relied heavily on data from ZIMRA, which is our tax authority. So I think there may be some few issues here and there regarding the actual calculations and so on, but really I think the analysis is evidence-based and is based on authentic data and authentic models. But maybe some of the issues or what the authors may consider maybe, which I think could be important, is that much of the analysis relied on the data that was there before the introduction of ZIG. But maybe the ZIG period is so short that it cannot be just modeled on its own. But maybe I would ask the presenters to look at what they came up with as findings and conclusions, but then say that now that there have been some policy changes, like the removal of the 10% premium on retail pricing, there's removal of the auction, there's a relatively stable official exchange rate, but now also that the parallel market is emerging again, does that really change the analysis? Does that change the conclusions that they came up with in the data that they used before the introduction of ZIG? Because much of what they have is before that period. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. No, the others are authors, so we are not going to allow them to comment. They will be doing question and answers. So I think I'm going to hand over to the floor, but as I see it, there are basically four issues. There's Dr. Masliandima's paper, where he's recommending this contingent fund. So let's just try and focus on some of the core issues, rather than data and methodology. Then we have three issues coming up from Pindiri's paper, or the common paper. The first, I think, is very important. They're saying that exchange rate distortions, which they describe as differential between the official exchange rate and the parallel market rate, is creating informalization. So this is, I think, a topical issue, and they've made estimates of that. So informalization is issue number one. And then the other two issues relate to loss of revenue by the government because of this exchange rate distortion. One is to do with lags in payment from taxpayers, and the second one is to do with the differential in revenue, in the estimation of, say, customs revenue due to use of official exchange rate rather than the parallel market rate. And they have estimated this to be $3 billion, which is very substantial. If the Ministry of Finance had that kind of money, I think we would be, we may not have had this conference. So thank you very much, and I open the floor now. So I hand over to the Master of Ceremonies, and you may please direct and simple questions, no comments, please.
Yes, please. I think, thank you, Prof. I also have a first question. No, sorry, you can do that. I have a first question, of course, is why is the ZIG depreciating? I think that's a good, simple question which someone can answer. So let's put that as a first question. I think that is what people are interested in, watching this, Prof, and also about how it has an impact on prices. So I think let's start with that question. Sir.
Thank you, Professor Albert Makochikana, University of Zimbabwe Business School. 2 questions to Pindiri and the team. So your 2 objectives, your paper is lopsided. I can't say. Your paper is lopsided on whether, can I say, sympathetic to government? Yeah, you talk about inflation. That's where is the private sector? I thought also the private sector, like they do assignment for government and they get payment after 3 months or after 6 months. I think private sector is also losing a lot. I thought it was good to also have calculations for that, so that I think even your paper becomes more enticing to read. Then secondly, the same on the overvalued exchange rate. You were only concentrating on Zimra or tax revenue, but again with the issue of the private sector, those that are doing the business, they are also losing out. I thought it's also important to have calculated that, so that we have the calculations for the government and general private sector, so that we are both carried on board. Then lastly, well, not specified to Masia Lima, but in general, on the climate change, I was looking at the program in previous paper, the impacts, but I couldn't see a paper, maybe it's for another. In all this, where is health economics? Where is the health of humans, of animals? We are talking of climate change, impact on agriculture, on this, but we know that this health, so this climate change, too much what? It means biologically, as human beings, we can't function effectively, as an example. So I'm just saying the health economics part.
Right, thank you very much indeed. As I said, keep your questions succinct, please, and to the point. Nishek, and then we'll come to you, Andy.
Thank you, Andy. Mine is very short, directed to the team, Pindiriri. I think they offered an interesting proposal because they identified the fiscal gap arising from all these losses that they talked about. And they are suggesting in their solution perhaps a reprioritization for a period where maybe we hold infrastructural spend and make that a source of increase in our reserves in order to support the currency. What I wanted to find out is, I think you also proposed that maybe we could find a source of financing which is not local, like we could find a creditor, external or local. So 2 questions. Is there an estimation of what amount we need to raise in order to support the currency? Secondly, what kind of period do you think this can be done in? Is it a year? If we suspend infrastructure or spend for a period, for how long? I believe this is a big opportunity now to do it because there's no electoral pressure. So there's room for it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mishek. Also as well, let's not forget, Nicholas, I would like to know where do we get the money for your climate fund? It'll be interesting. Right, Sweeneth, please, as we said, let's move along.
Thank you. In a country where normal development financing for the current climate is very limited, where the low regret investments are currently undersubscribed, where do we draw the boundary between contingency, use of the contingency fund for contingency and mitigation versus just the normal development financing? Since the return to that contingency fund depends on proper structuring of that. Secondly, in the past, especially for irrigation investments, Zimbabwe used to have a national irrigation development fund that was almost capitalized through a tax from all players who were salaried. Is it the right time now to reintroduce a national irrigation development finance facility capitalized through some kind of targeted taxation, perhaps structured in the same way as our AIDS program? Thank you.
Thank you. The final question before we throw it to the panel, and then I will have, maybe if we have time, some more questions. But let's do the final question, then Prof can manage it from there.
Thank you. My name is Elisha Moyo. My question is to the first presenter who mentioned about the contingent fund. I just wanted to know if there have been consideration of the national contingents plans which are developed by the Civil Protection, but also if there have been considerations of related initiatives which were being coordinated by the Climate Change Management Department. Unfortunately, I think this institute, the Climate Change Management Department, may not be in here. I think one presenter mentioned maybe the importance of coordinating to ensure that we don't create anything that is parallel or duplicate efforts, but also build on what could be mainstreamed into other existing programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't forget, those of you who are watching on ZTN Prime and ZBC and all other platforms, we will also ask your questions and we'll find time, not today, but possibly early in the morning to answer. Prof?
Thank you very much. So let's answer this first round of questions. So let me first give it to Dr. Matsiandima. There are a few questions for him, particularly relating to the funding of the climate fund and the irrigation fund possibilities. So maybe you could respond to those.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Thank you, esteemed participants, for your comments and contributions, which are quite positive. Well, let me start with where do we get the money from. So, the African Development Bank estimates that between 2019 and 2020, in terms of climate finance, Zimbabwe got something around $488 million. And compared to an expected requirement of 555, that left a gap of about $62 million. And in terms of making sure that we close that gap, that is where then a scheme or probably a plan like a contingent fund would come in handy to make sure that you don't finance it through destabilizing sources. Now, when do we get this money? If you read the proposed, climate change management bill, under which this climate change fund is proposed, the money is supposed to come from domestic sources. So sources like, for example, let's say, carbon taxation, on the various sectors that sort of, contribute to CO2 emissions. But in the same, would also expect that extra money would come from international sources. So if you checked in my presentation there, in the last, scenario analysis, I actually had that part where then I infused to say, okay, let's see if the presence of these contingent funds, when it's crowding in extra funding from the international community in the form of grants, in the form of concessional funding, what is, the impact? And I think that was clearly, illustrated there. So, in short, I'm saying it's from domestic sources. That is where I emphasize that if we are not careful and we grow it too big, we run into the risk of crowding out the private sector, especially through, high, taxation on, let's say, corporates, or even on, emitters of CO2. But more importantly, because this fund is seen as part of an initiative and commitment by the government to live within its NDCs in terms of managing CO2 emissions. There's also practically, I think we have heard even the UNDP actually, indicating that with such commitments, it also comes in with extra flows from the international community. So that is what I would say on that. Then coming to Professor Makochekana, in terms of where health is in this whole climate process. So if you checked on the pie chart or the wheel that I presented there, which showed the various transmission mechanisms linking climate change-induced disasters to the macroeconomy, there is an aspect of productivity. Okay, so when, for example, we've got very high temperatures, you also even have human labor productivity actually, slowing down. Even when you have got, mortality, issues of morbidity, all those, they come in to affect those are health issues, I think you'd agree with me. They affect the productivity of labor. But over and above that, even if you treat like animals, it could be your cattle, it could be your donkeys that we use probably in terms of drawing your implements, you can regard them as a part of your capital in terms of production. So when they die, that is capital being destroyed. All those are aspects of this model. So in a nutshell, I think that is probably how I would link up with your question. Then the line, I think it was from Dr. in terms of drawing the line between the use of the contingent fund versus other developmental initiatives. Yes, that's true. So that is actually the current challenges that we have, where if I'm correct, or probably if I'm not correct, maybe I'll be corrected here, the carbon tax, for example, if it's pooled together with other resources in the consolidated revenue fund, because we all know that money is fungible. When money is fungible, it means once it's there, it can flow into the uses of anything else other than the priorities of climate mitigation and climate adaptation. So with the contingent fund then, what then we are proposing, or what the paper is proposing, is instead of the money getting into the pool, the bigger pool, it should be in a dedicated fund with also dedicated parameters in terms of its uses. So that if it's, for example, in terms of public infrastructure construction, which is climate resilient, then it has to go there. If it means crop switching, it has to go towards crop switching, towards crops that are climate resilient. So that's what we are trying to resolve, to say, let's parcel it out and make sure that it's visibly and also strictly managed for the purposes of mitigation and adaptation. Then the contingent fund versus other civil protection activities. Yes, we already have other civil, protection activities, but at times when we generalize in terms of our interventions as government, you may also tend to lose the focus of the peculiarities of what should be targeted with regard to issues of productivity and growth enhancement. So, and also to take note that, so I was discussing with Dr. during one of the breaks, that when you talk of adaptation, what seems to be in the minds of most of us here is issues to do with crops and seed hybrids, those that are drought resilient. That is generally what comes into the minds. And also in terms of seed protection, how do we rescue those who have been flooded in terms of mitigation? But here the emphasis should be on adaptation, because when we intervene adequately at the adaptation stage, even in terms of the fiscal outlay at the mitigation point are also minimized. And that can only be done with strictly targeted interventions that are instead of the wider civil protection. So I think that is what I would say, Prof, at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Masian Lima. So let's move to the questions on the other paper. So I think basically there were 3 questions in my understanding, although if they have noted some more, they can answer them. And there are 3 of them here, so I'll give them different questions. So the first question relating to what about private sector losses was raised. That is not just government, but overvalued exchange rate affects the private sector and needs estimation. So I'll give that to Dr. Pindiriri, who is the econometric expert over here. Then the second question related to, I think, reserves, whether it's just a simple matter of letting the exchange rate go and assuming that the parallel rate and the market rate will somehow stabilize, or without any sort of support from reserves. That's a key question. So can it just be the market equilibrating without reserves, or will the exchange rate continue to depreciate unless you have some reserves? So perhaps Victor would like to answer that question. And the third one is the more general one raised by our MC. Why is the ZiG depreciating? That's a very big one, but I will give that to Jimmy, and he has 2 minutes to answer that. Thank you.
Okay, I think I can start. Thank you, Prof. Yeah, right. Probably that's to go back to correct Dr. Chigumira, right? I think maybe I missed it. It's not exactly that seigniorage has a positive effect, but the net, as I said, the net effect is negative. That's the net effect. So I talked about the net effect is basically negative. You are very right there. And going back to Prof. Makoche, right? The coverage here, our coverage, the scope was actually public, the physical space. So we said it is tight. So how can we improve our domestic resource mobilization? So we are not also considering the private sector, but we're looking at the public sector side where we mobilize the resources so that we have enough to fund, adequate to fund adaptation and so forth. And the last one, Prof, allow me to say to Doku here, Mupov, that actually the data we use is quite good, and I don't think we have serious problems with the data. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So on the question, I think it was an excellent question. Is there an estimate of an amount that needs to be raised to support the currency? So I think we can think about this in terms of two different types of pressures that fall on the currency. One of them being monetary and one of them being fiscal. So on the monetary side, the more there is a excess growth in reserve money, the more there is pressure on the currency. On the fiscal side, if you have a very large fiscal deficit, that also needs to be financed one way or the other. And that, by its inherent nature, is also going to put pressure on the currency. So what that means in terms of amounts, well, so we need to avoid excess creation of reserve money on the one side. On the fiscal side, I think what's urgently needed is essentially a primary fiscal surplus. So if you look at spending and revenue, they need to roughly balance even before interest payments. And interest payments have risen quite extensively in the last few years, and they put a lot of pressure on the fiscal accounts. So there's no specific number, because if the government chooses to spend less, they also don't need to raise as much. And so therefore, there's what the exact number is less important than is there adequate balance in the fiscal accounts, and do you have a primary surplus? And at the moment, we're seeing that maybe the official accounts may show a surplus, but there are certain bits and pieces that are waiting to be paid. So we know that there were extensive capital expenditures in recent months that are still awaiting payment. And so therefore there is real fiscal pressure that needs to be dealt with in order to deal with the credibility of the currency. Thank you.
Thanks. In terms of before I get to the why the ZIG is depreciating question, I just want to quickly appreciate the question about the private sector impact. So we didn't calculate that, but I can just tell you it's massive. It really is massive. So it's over and above the numbers that we've posted, which are already the fiscal impacts. So the question about ZIG and why it's depreciating. If you look at ZIG broad money at the end of March, it was 3.1 billion. End of June, 9 billion, right? Growth of 190%. So that's the fundamental cause of the depreciation of ZIG. And why would we have that depreciation? It talks to fiscal stress. So what it talks to is central bank funding treasury for fiscal expenditures, which then results in money supply creation, money supply growth, which then has its knock-on in the exchange rate, open market exchange rate. So unfortunately, we're going back to the prior, as my colleague has said, how is this analysis differing from, would differ now in the era of ZIG. We hope it will be different, but if we don't change things quite quickly, we're going to be going back to the same story as what we presented in terms of the losses to Treasury. Now, the good thing is that the numbers in absolute terms are not that big, because 9 billion ZIG, okay, of broad money, as at the end of June, is only about just over $600 million at the official exchange rate. So it's very salvageable situation, but obviously we need to act very quickly so that we stop. If we can stop the ZIG money creation, then we stabilize, and then we can bring that exchange rate back. Thank you.
All right. Okay, Prof, is there any more questions? Final comments? Is the microphone, please?
We can allow maybe 3 questions more, then we close.
All right, so we can get 3 more questions. Can I get the ushers, please, to bring the microphones? Whoa, 1, 2, 3.
That's it.
Going. 4, persistence. Persistence, you're right. We let persistence get away with it, Prof. Yeah, we need persistence comments. So let's start at the far end.
Persistence is not allowed to speak because he's a member of the Monetary Policy Committee.
He's not allowed to speak. All right, well, you get him after the break. Right, who's speaking? Thank you then, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I'm Ethel Mangwaya from UNDP. On the Pindiriri paper, you spoke about the exchange rate policy existing and being good in terms of the willing buyer, willing seller. I'm wondering where these willing sellers are. This might help us answer why the policy is not working, despite it existing and being good. Where are they? And what will motivate them to sell on the formal market when they can get a premium on the parallel market? And then on the debt restructuring, that was another recommendation. I don't know whether you looked at the current arrears clearance and debt resolution process. Does it speak to your recommendation? Granted, it's looking external, but does it speak to what you're suggesting? What are the gaps and what else needs to be done? Thanks.
Where are the sellers? And talk about the debt resolution issue. Right, there was one more here. Please stand if you don't mind and introduce yourself.
My name is Philip Chabada. I'm a SADC representative for ADDI. My question is, I'll start with a comment from what I'm hearing. It looks like from the streets, they have languages of a deal and majet. I know you won't understand that one. A deal and majet. If we can stop majet and start doing deals. Deals is something that that is accountable for. But jet is somewhere where we give people, say, a work that is done today costs 100 ZIG. But we give someone 200 ZIG. And we don't know when we are paying him. We're paying day after tomorrow before it even gets to 200 ZIG. It's only 110 ZIG. So we've already given someone 200 ZIG. What are we expecting to do? So my question is there a real will for us to transform this economy and to change this bleeding on the monetary policy, especially the ZIG exchange rate? It is not pushed by the small boys. But is there a will between we, the leaders? If I were to ask 90% of people here, we have US dollar in our pockets, we don't have ZIG. And other countries that are around us, you can't use US dollar. And we keep asking, why is ZIG falling? And why are we pushing for US? When we are giving people 200 ZIG instead of 100, they send their boys into the streets and to push the ZIG. That's the reason why ZIG is where it is. Is there a will in our midst? Is there a will in the leadership to stop this bleeding?
A lot of ZIG chasing a few dollars, I suppose, with money supply growth. Right, we had one more question, if I wasn't mistaken. Oh, Busisa? He always says I don't look left. Can you please give to Busisa one again? Thank you. These are good questions. And of course, to the citizens out there, ZIG stability is important because it keeps your prices stable. Yeah, which is all we want, is it not? We want a stable currency that has value. You see, sir?
Yes, thank you, Andy. I just wanted to probe a little bit on the issue of willing buyer, willing seller, a complete free float, which is something Jimmy sort of mentioned as a silver bullet to say that if we just allow willing sellers to come, name your price, and willing buyers meet. We've just come from a very painful hyperinflation accounting, where accounting information out of this country is so difficult for investors to interpret. When you've just said in your second submission that we've gone from 3 to 9, which is money supply growth, and you are saying that transmission should just go through into the economy, and we see it for what it is and have inflation basically go back to hyperinflation. This is what am I correct in reading? How are we balancing this conversation so that we have, or are you suggesting that we should take the pain now and the pain goes away, something like that? I just want to be sure of what you are submitting. Thank you.
Right, I think we will close there. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah. Thank you. So, of our three panelists, who would like to answer the question? Jimmy.
Right, so I think I'll start by the issue of will, okay? I think there's definitely will. I think it's just that we are under a lot of fiscal stress, right? The reality is we have active facilities that are putting us under pressure. And it's a question of how do we manage those? Which leads to the next question. I'll answer the question about structured dialogue first. So structured dialogue is more aimed at the debts which are not being serviced. The fiscal pressure is coming from the debts that are being serviced. Because there's a bunch of facilities, some of which were taken over from the central bank, which are being serviced. And obviously, because these are lenders who continue to lend to us despite sanctions, etc., we don't want to let them down. So we're putting them under priority and we're servicing those debts. The structured dialogue will be extremely helpful in terms of strengthening, especially Treasury's hand, when they deal with other ministries, because having a successful staff-monitored program will give us more credibility in the eyes of the international community. It will also relatively quickly unlock funding, which will help. But more importantly, it will help give Treasury a basis with which to negotiate with anyone else who's trying to put them under pressure for money creation or other such things. So that's where the structured dialogue really is a very, very critical part of this whole process. And then about where are the willing sellers? The willing sellers are literally everywhere, okay? Because people need ZIG for various purposes. Businesses need ZIG for various purposes. Individuals need ZIG for various purposes. The issue is really about fixing the exchange rate, which would then attract those into the formal system. Now you may ask, well, has this happened before? The truth is it has. We've successfully converged on a number of occasions. In August 2019, we had reached a point before the famous, I won't mention the company's name, but there was a certain company which was paid out the equivalent of $200 million in treasury bills in one day, okay, which blew up the system. But before that day, the parallel rate was actually less than the bank rate. So we had achieved convergence successfully in August 2019. Just after the introduction of the auction in 2020, we got very close to convergence. Just after the measures which were announced in May 2022 to stabilize the economy, we got very close to convergence. Running up to the election last year, you could literally get foreign currency as much as you wanted from the official system. And it all started to unravel after the election. So we can do it. The question is, can we sustain it? And it's the sustainability that requires solving that fiscal problem, because it's relatively easy for Treasury to stop paying people for a short period of time. But eventually, government needs to move on. And that's where the problems start. So that now leads on to Busisa's question. Okay, as long as money supply is growing, as long as we cannot stabilize that fiscal, like if you've got a ship, the ship has got a leak. If you're not going to fix the leak, the ship's not going to go very well at all. You may be able to have the bilge pumps pumping out the water, which is kind of what we're trying to do when we use NNCDs to suck out liquidity. But we haven't stopped the leak. And it's better to have an exchange rate which is proper, even in inflation environment, because ask yourself this question: where would you rather the exchange rate get set? In a transparent market or in the shadows? But we will never get stability unless we solve the money supply growth issue. Thanks.
Thank you. And then maybe I'll just follow up on the issue of the structured dialogue platform.
Yeah, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. So we think that this is absolutely critical, both in the short term and in the long term. So ultimately, what we see, the fundamental thing that's driving macroeconomic instability is the need to pay for some of these external liabilities. So there's a need for broader restructuring. I think the World Bank and others acknowledge that currently Zimbabwe's debt situation is unsustainable, and there is a need to think more broadly about arrears clearance and debt resolution of both the traditional Paris Club multilaterals as well as some of the new lenders. But in order to do that, you can't do that overnight. So there's a need for immediate intervention and immediate macroeconomic stabilization, which would provide impetus for the economic pillar of the structured dialogue platform. And for us to move forward, there really is need for some clear improvement on some of the key pillars on the economic pillar, which talks about macro stability through monetary policy, fiscal policy, and others. And so having a stable macroeconomic situation, even for a 12-month period, would do wonders in moving the dialogue forward on the economic pillar, and therefore help, even in the short term, with stabilization. And that we really think here that fiscal policy can be the macroeconomic, the anchor for macroeconomic stability. Thanks.
Thank you. So let me quickly summarize in 1 minute. So basically what they are saying is that Zimbabwe has plenty of foreign exchange. Supply is not an issue. Well, I think there's some truth in that, where you should compare our foreign exchange earnings with East Africa. Bigger countries, Kenya, 40 million people, right? They earn less than us. So, what, last year was 11 billion or 12 billion? Well, we have lots of forex. So supply is not the thing, but that supply is not coming into the formal market, it goes into the informal market. So there are some structural issues there. One of them being the functioning of the willing buyer, willing seller market. And so they are coming up with these solutions. And then on the demand side, they say basically the problem is excess money supply, which creates excess demand for the currency. And therefore we need discipline from the monetary and fiscal authority to limit money supply growth to something that is sustainable. Resolve the structural issues so that the supply comes through and we'll all be fine. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Big round of applause for the panel. Let's thank our panel. We'll start with Dr. Karen Pindiriri. Thank you very much. You can make your way off the stage. Dr. Mpofu, thank you. Jimmy Silos, thank you, sir. Victor, thank you from the World Bank. Appreciate that. Dr. Chigumira, thank you, sir. Tatenda Kambasha, thank you, from, of course, the venture capitalist, and, of course, our Reserve Bank colleague, Chief Economist, Dr. Nicholas Mansi Andima, and the big round for the prof. I told you, where's protocol? Thank you so much indeed. Now, again, I do urge anyone who is watching online through all our platforms, ZTN Prime and other platforms, ZBC, please send your questions and comments through on the subject. I think it's a very emotive and topical subject, and if you'd like to, we will get all your questions together today, and hopefully first thing in the morning as we start off, we will try and answer some of those questions. I'll give 15 minutes for that in the morning. Now then, that brings our session 5, climate change and macroeconomic issues, to a close. We now move to our next session, session 6, public expenditure policies and programs to build resilience and mitigate drought effects. I will tell our speakers that you will each have 15 minutes each. Oh, before I forget, I'd also like to thank the UNDP resident representative, Dr. Ayodele Odusola, for being part of that previous session. Thank you for your presentation, sir. Give a big round of applause to all the presenters and the panel. Thank you. Without further ado, 15 minutes you have. I'd like to now call upon the Permanent Secretary in Zimbabwe's Ministry of Energy and Power Development, Dr. Gloria Magombo, to talk on the policy brief. Please, a big round of applause for the PS. Remember what I said, protocol, you have to keep clapping until she gets here. It's a long walk. Yeah, it's a long walk. Come on, let's go, let's go. Thank you. Okay.
Good afternoon. Hey. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for responding. I would like to write on the protocols which were clearly defined this morning so that I don't miss anyone. I would like to thank the professor for inviting us to come here to speak to the issues of policy relating to building resilience and driving economic transformation under the a changing climate. I have a presentation, but I can quickly speak to the issues whilst they are bringing it up. What happened to that screen? I'll just briefly speak to the vision and mission of the ministry. Basically, our vision is aligned to the SDGs. It's also aligned to the national vision to being a middle-income society by 2030, and we intend to achieve that by ensuring universal access by that time. And we are aware of the need to change that to about 2028.
Over here, it seems completely had waited.
in the short term to increase capacity from solar. We have a number of projects which should be coming in before year end. I think this year we expect to add another 257 megawatts. Medium to long term, we are looking at about 480 plus or minus, especially coming from the repowering of Wange and bringing in the additional unit from Kariba, but that's assuming we would have had more rains. But we want to also bring in Patoka, we want to bring in Devil's Gorge as alternatives. And most people will say, why do you want to bring more hydro along the same Zambezi basin, which is losing water? But what we are saying is, if you put more reservoirs along the river, you'll be using the same water before it eventually gets to the Indian Ocean. So you can sweat that water as it goes towards Kabura Bassa and towards the Indian Ocean. So it's important for us to do that. But in the medium to long term, we have solar of up to about 2,000 megawatts, which has been identified, licensed, and is being looked at as a potential for development. So when we look at resources, we are not having problems with resources. We have so many resources in terms of energy, natural energy resources. But what we need is financing. We don't have financing to develop the projects to bankability and into full implementation. That financing needs a macroeconomic stability. Most of the projects which are at bankability stage, what they need is government assurance that if I put in my money, I'll be able to remit it either as dividend or as loan repayments to whoever would have given me the money. And stability in our macroeconomic side is very critical to that. But we also have a utility which was struggling, but a lot of interventions have been put in at policy level in terms of pricing policies to ensure that they are cost reflective, and that has helped in ensuring that they are fine. But I think one of the key issues I just wanted to highlight, which was raised by the President in his presentation, which is the issue of the role of energy minerals in a just transition. And when we speak to issues of green energy minerals, Zimbabwe is one of those countries. Unfortunately, here there was supposed to be a map of Africa showing the different distribution of the green minerals in the continent. And if you looked at Zimbabwe in that African map, you can't see Zimbabwe because of the endowment which we have as a country of these green energy minerals. So it's very important to say there's an expectation that the demand for green energy minerals to ensure that the world remains within the 1.5 degrees Celsius change in temperature. We are seeing more temperature changes in our own continent now. And also to ensure that we have movement from high carbon to low carbon, not necessarily as Zimbabwe, but the rest of the world. The demand growth for critical energy minerals is going to go by more than ×6. But what has been happening is that we have not been getting the full value of the cake because we have been exporting most of these minerals in their natural form. And I'm happy that through the Minister of Finance and the direction of His Excellency, we have come up with strategic minerals, which we are saying they cannot be exported without value addition. But what is key in that is that if you look at the current focus where we are just mining and exporting, you find that the market value of these minerals, which are exported at just extraction point without value addition, is about 11 billion. This is a study which was done by Bloomberg for the African Union. And if you just add value, you move by just putting in smelters to metal base, you move to 44 billion in terms of what you can return by adding value through the smelters. But if you move to precursor, that changes to about 271 billion. The same mineral, but because we have now done certain value addition within the country, And there are studies to try and work towards getting to precursor. Countries like Indonesia, I visited them recently, that's where they are. They are doing anodes. Their main mineral is nickel. We have mainly lithium, and we also do have nickel. We do have cobalt. We almost have most of these. And what is key is to bring in the investors to work with us to take advantage of these critical energy transition minerals so that we create value for the country to then fund its own infrastructure and resources. But some of it is a chicken and egg. So what is important is we need to continue to build on our infrastructure. This is road infrastructure, rail, and energy infrastructure. Because if we don't have that infrastructure, our capacity to move up this value chain is limited. So we believe that it's important that we work towards. I was talking to the professor earlier on and saying that when I spoke to the Indonesians, they were saying that what they did was they looked at the value chain for their mineral. In their case, it's nickel. But for us, we can do that for lithium and say what is it which we need to urgently put in place. And the president called for the private sector to come on board. And one of the issues the Indonesians said, they moved away from government to government issues, but looking at more business to business. This is a huge business. This is an opportunity for us to transition, but with the capacity to do that transition being generated internally. So we need, as ministries of both finance, industry, mines, and energy, because we are moving towards an energy transition, to make sure that we have the right policies which will allow for these technologies to be value added and we create the capacity. Gas to power is one of the critical elements which we need to work on. The work going on in Mzarabane is key, because with gas to power we can ramp up to 2,000, 3,000 megawatts within a year or two, even using emergency power units. And then the other one is to introduce the incentives, which I'm speaking to ensure that our energy minerals are value added, and then that the country should continue to pursue this value addition in terms of transition. We have started well with the lithium, with the initial concentration coming in, but we need to move for more. We need to move towards the sulfates. We need to move towards the implementation of the actual precursor way we are now doing the anodes. And all the minerals we are talking about are here in Zimbabwe. So I just thought, because of time constraints, I will end here. Thank you, Andy. I was now hyperventilating.
Thank you very much, P.S. Magombo, and it's a pity that Andy had to rush you off the stage. I would have wanted also to hear, given that the insights you've given us, that about 61% of the Zimbabwean population still rely on firewood. If the policy interventions taken by governments, such as duty-free on solar imports, to what extent that has yielded results. And as well, I'm sure most people in this conference room, the issue around the mandatory blending of fuel, the rationale behind that. What is the rationale behind that? Why not give people options to choose between blended and unleaded fuel? And also, besides having one sole provider blending, doesn't it also affect competitiveness in line with the theme of building resilience and driving economic transformation when we have a sole provider in one sector? But I hope these are issues that can be addressed in other sessions. And I hope also that we can utilize Honorable Chidua's presence here, given his critical role as chairperson of the Finance and Budget Parliamentary Portfolio Committee. But I would like now to invite our next presentation from the Great Zimbabwe University, Mr. Msevenzi Douglas. He will be giving us a presentation on analysis of the legislative and policy frameworks for public finance expenditure in drought-induced climate change crisis in Zimbabwe. Please put your hands together as he comes forward.
Thank you. If I may add, you have 15 minutes is what you have. should we do this?
15 minutes, as Andy has said.
Oh, okay. Before you continue going, let's let's do what we did before in our previous things. PS, would you like to come back? I'm sorry, I should have asked you to come and sit. PS, please give them a round of applause. We'll also have, obviously you'll stay, Douglas, when you're finished. Can we also call up Busisa Moyo, Chris Mugaga, if he's in the house, and it says Dimitri Silos, but I think he's trying to hide his name. It's actually Jimmy, but I think on the program it says Dimitri. So Jimmy Silos, please, Jimmy, please come up. And of course, the chair, Fidelis Ingorora, please. Fidelis, please, a big round of applause for our panelists. And as soon as you finish speaking, please take your seat. Okay, sir, I leave it to you, Douglas. It's just up and down if you have a presentation. Down is, when it down should move it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. May I acknowledge all protocols observed. I was even worried if I was going to make a viable presentation in the afternoon, bearing in mind that people have consumed something, and the little science I know is the brain will direct all the blood this side. So upstairs people may start sleeping, but I'm very happy for that. We are resilient, and hence we are speaking to our theme, building resilience. My topic is very simple. It's not complicated. Let me make these preliminary remarks. It is very different from other presentations. Why? There are no graphs. Number two, there is no algebra. To those who have done some mathematics, there is no... okay, let me end there. It's very simple. Why? We are dealing with the legal framework. The legal framework. And I was almost taken away when the president was, His Excellency was actually articulating my presentation. He was talking about the Paris Agreement. He was talking about the bill, the climate change management bill. He was also talking about the structural instrument, 150 of 2023, and they said, I'm done. So it means, let me try. I'm there. Thank you. The legislative and institutional framework they speak to the Sustainable Development Goal number 13. My presentation also speaks to NDS1. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, because I'm used to working. The National Executive Legislative System and Process Framework in Climate Change Finance is critically important in the mitigation of drought. I think that's why I can allude to what the President was saying. He was talking about the legal framework. It is an important, critical part in trying to mitigate the effects of climate change. Then the problem, I said, is very simple. I've tried to simplify things. The problem is, to what extent does the legislative and policy framework in Zimbabwe promote climate finance? Does Zimbabwe have the necessary legislative and policy frameworks in climate finance? That is essentially my task. That's my objective, to conduct a critical comparative analysis of the legislative framework on climate change, climate finance in Zimbabwe. And my comparative analysis is based with South Africa. For obvious reasons, we share a similar legal framework. I think for those who might not know, when Cecil John Rhodes came to Zimbabwe, he came with the South African law, which we are still using. So that's why I decided to have a comparative analysis with South Africa. The research methodology, I tried to use the doctrinal approach. That's why I said it's very simple. And I also use the human rights approach. Why the human rights approach? I think we must emphasize that the impact of climate change is affecting the realization of human rights. That's why I think there's a big issue talking about food, food security. That's the right to food. And also environmental rights, which are enshrined in Section 73 of our Constitution. So I use the desktop approach, and I also use the comparative analysis. I will not repeat that. I was trying to identify gaps in our legislative and institutional framework for climate finance. And I used South Africa. You are going to see why I decided to use South Africa. So my findings, I'm now going to read from my paper. From the major findings, it is common cause that the international and regional legislative framework have provisions for climate change and climate finance in particular. And I think I can take you back to the president. He mentioned the Paris Agreement, mentioning Article 6. He was speaking to the international legal framework, which we are a party to. And number two, Africa is bearing the brunt. I think he mentioned that. That's why I'm saying I was done. He mentioned that we are in problem of climate change, but we are not the problem makers. We are part of the problem. Zimbabwe, yes, a legal framework. I think I've reduced my volume. It has a legal framework, but it is not robust. Let me mention that word, robust. It is not robust. You're going to see why I'm saying this. Number one, I'm using from the South African comparative. South Africa has a specific act for climate change. A specific act. Yes, we are there. I'm very happy that the president has mentioned that, and I was excited that now we are there. That the enactment of this bill is almost there. I think we are there. South Africa, 3 months back, they enacted the Climate Change Act. They have a specific for that. Number two, in the Act of South Africa, now I'm looking at their Climate Change Act, they have incorporated provisions for climate finance. They've also incorporated, which I think it must be one of our key recommendations from this conference. They have a commission for climate change. A commission. And it is an institution which is entrenched in their act. But when I was looking at our draft, but I'm happy it's still a draft, we can work on that and improve and incorporate. They have something which they are calling a designated authority. But I would prefer a commission. I don't know, madam from the Gender Commission, are you around? Oh, perfect. It is one of the commissions I will always talk about when about the successes of the commissions. Of course, this one will be separate because it's not a constitutional commission. But the Gender Commission, it has been tasked by government to fight the gender equality. And you can agree with me, we have evidence of that. So I'm proposing for the climate change, let's have a commission. Another point from the Act, the South African Act, I think I've mentioned this, it has a number of provisions which they have incorporated addressing the issue of, oh, I'm gone. Okay, maybe let's move on to my recommendations then. I'm given 5 minutes. I thought I've spoken for 5 minutes. Okay, thank you very much. Maybe let me quickly look at this other one. The South Africa have made major strides in the aspect of green bonds. Green bonds. They have actually have at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange have a segment for green bonds, but they don't have an instrument yet, so we can beat them this time around. We can have an instrument addressing the issue of green bonds. Maybe now let me look at my recommendations. I think I'll try to fix that in the next. Okay, those are my recommendations. We need to enact the Climate Change Management Act as a matter of urgency. We also need to incorporate, I was going to talk about that, some provisions on climate finance in the Public Finance Management Act, maybe to buttress our stance on climate finance. And we also need on the green bonds, I think I've mentioned that. We also need on the carbon credit, I think I've mentioned that. We have an instrument, which is good, but it has some gaps. For example, I will look at their enforcement or their penalty. You would find out they are saying in the instrument, you can only be suspended or be deregistered. But you can imagine for somebody who have committed a crime which maybe cost billions of US dollars, then you only suspend. But if you look at the South African, they actually have a jail penalty, and also they've got a prohibitive fine. Do I still have some time? 1 minute. Okay, maybe with 1 minute I rest my case.
Please, a big round of applause. Well done, Mr. Douglas. Thank you very much indeed. I think it's clear there, of course, that robust laws need to be placed. The President did say the Climate Act is going to be put in place. Right. Without further ado, let's move on. And I'm hoping that I do give you each 15 minutes, but if you do it quicker, I'll be most grateful. Next speaker, UNDP Project Manager for Climate Development Framework, Raul Fernandez. Give him as he's coming. Talking on policy brief integrating Zimbabwe arrears and debt resolution process with climate finance, the case for debt for climate swaps. Please, a big round of applause for Raul. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. All protocols observed. I would like to acknowledge all the authorities in the room. First of all, I want to thank as well UNDP and Climate Promise for funding this assignment. I'm not UNDP staff, I wish. I am just a consultant for the assignment, representing the Climate Change Management Department and UNDP today. We have been developing the NDC implementation plan and climate investment framework for Zimbabwe over the past months, which will be launched hopefully next month. And today I wanted to, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that we have this plan in place. It has been developed based on consultations with line ministers, government agencies, private sector, civil society, academia. So this is reflecting most of the recommendations that we have been discussing over the last 2 days. So good news. The bad news is that there is a finance gap of 80%. We have estimated that. So I think this is a daunting challenge. But today I wanted to focus on a very simple idea. I want to build the business case to link the climate finance agenda to the arrears and debt restructuring process, which I think could help unlocking climate finance in the future. First, I'm going to give an overview of the climate finance landscape. As we know, Zimbabwe submitted the NDC in 2021, covering 8 sectors for one has to emphasize that this NDC was made conditional to the support from the development partners, although it is also important to remember that the country is already doing its bit with its own national resources. For example, Mfumbutsa is a good example of how the government is using its own resources to fund climate adaptation, independent from the funding of development partners. As we said before, the estimated cost of the NDC implementation plan is $14.9 billion US, and we estimated the resources available in 2.9 billion until 2030. This is based on the analysis of past overseas development assistance, budget expenditure, and we projected this to 2030. So these are estimates, but it gives a good indication of the available resources. In this context, we have been discussed the pressing issue of the drought from El Niño. This is a major problem. The government has made an appeal of $2 billion US. Yesterday we celebrated the payout from ARC, which was $32 million US. So if you compare this payout with the amount that it is required to address the cost of this emergency, you realize what is the magnitude of this protection gap. Another trend that I want to highlight is that in the past, the V20, which is the group of vulnerable countries with representation from ministries of finance, estimated the impact of climate risk on public debt, and this was to the tune of $62 billion US for the period only covering 2007 to 2016. The magnitude is expected to have increased over the past years. And I also want to make reference to a study by the IMF, which indicated that only 7 countries out of the 29 low-income countries that submitted climate pledges has enough fiscal space to undertake some of the required investments. So what we see here is a linkage between climate risk and debt stress, which works in a very simple way. We have seen that responding to emergencies is expensive. It has an impact on economic growth. For example, it also affects investment decisions for households, businesses. It has an impact in the capital development of a country, and therefore, over the long run, it is expected that climate risk will put a strain on the fiscal resources available for countries like Zimbabwe, also eroding the tax base in the country. So this is a major trend that will remain with us for the time to come. And finally, the last point that I want to raise is the fact that it has been estimated that African countries require up to $277 billion US annually up until 2030 to meet climate targets. Out of that, only 15% had been mobilized in 2022. So this is also speaking about the climate finance gap that countries in the region are facing. Now, I want to place the attention in Zimbabwe's debt. I think we have discussed this today. I want to thank the speakers before, because they really paved the way for this presentation. Over 90% of GDP, that's the magnitude of the debt. Estimates from the African Development Bank put it in over $21 billion US. This is obviously unsustainable for a country like Zimbabwe, and 52% of this is owed to external creditors. As we have also mentioned, the country engaged in this arrears dialogue process with international creditors, with these 3 pillars: governance, compensation for farmers, and the reforms at the macroeconomic level. Ultimately, this process should lead to some sort of debt resolution, some write-off of existing debts, and also, and most importantly, I think, regaining access to concessional funding for the country, which currently is, is not the case. So this is my problem statement. Basically, we have a finance gap for the country. The country has no access to this concessional funding, which would allow the de-risking of investments and financial operations, also attracting the private capital markets at the international level as well. And finally, the issues around economic stability, which we have discussed in the previous sessions. So based on this, what I want to discuss today is what are the interdependencies between the climate finance agenda and the debt restructuring process, and how they could potentially reinforce each other. Well, this is the methodology or the research approach that we use for the development of the climate investment framework. Basically, standard approach for any consulting assignment. We interview people, many development partners. We look into secondary information. I think I want to emphasize the importance of the climate public expenditure review that was conducted with the support of the World Bank in 2022. And this was critical information that should be available every year. I think the Ministry of Finance should know to what extent climate finance is being deployed in the different sectors, and especially if this can be linked to outcome monitoring, all the better. And we mapped different projects from development partners and different funding platforms. This is our first result. We looked at the incidence of climate hazards and how they relate to debt. It was mentioned in the first session this morning that climate risk have an impact, and you can see that trend. This graph is anecdotal, but I think it clearly reflects that discussion point that we had before. So anytime there is a drought, anytime that there is a cyclone, it has an impact on Zimbabwe's public debt. Also, we have observed that when this happens, climate finance is diverted towards adaptation significantly. These peaks reflect that trend, and a bigger proportion of the budget goes towards this type of emergency response actions, which is fine in the context of these emergencies, but it means that investments are crowded out from other relevant actions, like, for example, rural electrification, to just refer to the previous presentation. Then we looked into the different projects that have been funded over the past years in the country related to climate finance. We mapped 67 ongoing projects for an overall value of 446 million. And out of this, we only identified 20% of these operations, or the value of these operations, was related to concessional funding from the International Fund for Agricultural Development and the OPEC. I think the amount was roughly $110 million for 2 projects. This is anecdotal, and I think the country should aim to increase its access to this type of funding, because it has the potential to leverage additional funding. And so far, this is not an option. And the last point, I'm going to refer to debt for climate swaps as a potential solution to this situation in the context of the arrears dialogue. I want to note a paper by the IMF, which mentioned that in cases like Zimbabwe, where debt is unsustainable, it would be preferable to go for a comprehensive debt restructuring, which may be not feasible in this case. So this may be a more pragmatic approach, which would involve a bilateral creditor, and it basically consists on agreeing on some terms to write off debt or renegotiate the terms of existing debt based on the conditionality to implement a certain program of climate projects that could be liable to be monitored, and generate those win-win incentives for the parties involved. So with this approach, there could be the space to alleviate some of the debt in the country while promoting climate action at the project level. However, I want to emphasize that this is context-specific and should be the result of a negotiated process, and I cannot say that this is the standard framework, but it provides some guidance on how this has been done in countries like Ecuador, Gabon, or Belize in the past. Now, our point is that by doing this, the country could be killing two birds with one stone. We will have the dialogue on arrears and debt restructuring as some sort of stick in this process, incentivizing these painful economic reforms. And then on the other hand, we could use climate action and climate finance as an incentive, the carrot in this case. There is a good foundation to identify this type of projects. As we said, the Ministry of Environment and Climate and Wildlife has been working on this in this implementation plan. Also, UNDP has been supporting the Industrial Development Bank of Zimbabwe in developing project concept notes for the GCF. These are sound concepts that could attract this funding. And our suggestion would be that around this arrears dialogue process and in the context of climate finance, a technical committee could be formed to discuss these issues. That would be our main recommendation for this policy brief. This is a roadmap that would help articulating this process. I don't think I have enough time, but I want to emphasize the importance of having this joint vision, engaging with development partners and multilateral creditors in this dialogue, and having done that in an inclusive manner, bringing together Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Environment, and other important ministries in the space. And well, to conclude, I think we are aware that climate risk is here to stay. It will have a long-lasting impact on public finance in the country. We have a historic opportunity, or at least a window of opportunity, to address the issue of debt resolution. I think climate action can also contribute to transform the structure of the economy in the country, as well as building the resilience of vulnerable households. And therefore, we think that it's very pertinent to consider the opportunity of linking these two agendas together. Yeah, that would be it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raul Fernandez. You want to grab a seat, Raul? Thank you so much. Of course, a big round of applause to UNDP Project Manager for Climate Development Framework, Raul Fernandez. Of course, I won't go into what he spoke about. I think that will be covered by Fidelis in the panel. But I would now like to call upon Bronson Mutanda, from Manicaland State University lecturer, building drought-resilient communities in the face of climate change, sustainable fiscal initiatives, policies, and strategies. Bronson, where are you? Please, a big round of applause. You can do better than that, the young man. Come on, I know it's late, but we need this. He needs our support. Okay, there we go. All right, here you go. Happy? You just point just down. Okay. Can you put the presentation up, please?
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity that you have given me to present. My name is Bronson Mutanda. I'm a lecturer at Manicaland State University. I'm going to present on a topic, building drought-resilient communities in the face of climate change, sustainable fiscal initiatives, policies, and strategies. And this is the structure of my presentation: background, research objectives, research methodology, main findings, and recommendations. Right, it is a reality that climate change is part of us, and it's affecting nations that are dotted around the globe. It's affecting all sectors. it's affecting agriculture, it's affecting energy generation, and Zimbabwe is also facing climate challenges. We have been experiencing drought for quite some time, but the frequency and severity of these events have significantly increased in the recent years due to climate change. And literature reveals that the temperatures in Zimbabwe are increasing at a rate of 0.03 degrees annually. Although small, it is having a significant effect on the intensity of droughts. In light of these challenges, the study seeks to unpack fiscal initiatives and policies for developing drought-resilient communities in the face of climate change. And these are the objectives of the research: to identify and evaluate effective publicly funded projects that have successfully enhanced drought resilience in communities, and to identify and assess fiscal policies that have successfully enhanced drought resilience in communities. And I'm going to use examples from across the globe to try and indicate some of the projects that are being adopted as a way of building drought-resilient communities. With regard to the methodology, 28 articles informed the writing of this research paper, and these articles were accessed from the Scopus database, Google Scholar, and reputable internet articles. And the cut-off dates were from 2010 to 2024 inclusive. Okay, the main findings. Number one, literature reveals that for us to build drought-resilient communities, we need to build solar farms. Solar farms is the need of the hour. And maybe as a way of examples, Australia is invested in solar farms and it's generating electricity from these solar farms. And almost 102 megawatts of electricity is being generated to power 33,000 homes, thereby alleviating energy shortages. We are in agreement that we are having load sheddings, and as a result, we are having challenges in accessing electricity, something which is impacting industries, something which is having an effect on industries. So for us maybe to build resilient communities, we need to come up with these solar farms, building solar farms so that we can generate electricity. Then literature also indicates that the other way of building resilient communities when it comes to the issue of energy is to have or to build wind farms. And studies indicate that Norway, for instance, has built wind farms which contributed to 4.8 terawatts per hour in 2022 to the country's energy. Then I'm not going to dwell much on this. I'm not going to focus much on this because from yesterday, this was actually explained, and literature is also indicating that for us to build drought-resilient communities, we must conscientize communities, teach the communities about the need for us to harvest water. We can actually encourage them to harvest water on a domestic level, and okay. Then water can also be harvested at a large scale through dams. Then there is also a need for us to invest in weather modification and cloud seeding technologies. A case in point is Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. They are investing much in weather modification technologies as a way of enhancing precipitation. So this is actually one of the most important investment approach that we can adopt as a nation. This was explained yesterday, public expenditure in research. There is need for support in terms of grants for research. Then when it comes to policies, we need to introduce the feed-in tariff. Let me give you an example of these countries, Germany, China, India. They introduced this policy whereby energy producers were given above market price for energy fed into the main grid. Then policy number 2, literature also reveals that tax breaks are also another strategy for improving energy generation. Then maybe the last one, providing subsidies for solar panel manufacturing and installation. Maybe let me go to the policy recommendations. Number 1, public expenditure should be directed on the development of solar farms in drought-prone areas, providing a reliable source of renewable energy and reducing dependence on hydroelectricity. Number 2, investment in small-scale and large-scale water infrastructure. Number 3, increase public expenditure in research and development of new technologies for drought mitigation and adaptation, such as cloud seeding and innovative irrigation. Number 4, implement cloud seeding programs to enhance precipitation and alleviate drought conditions. Number 5, reducing import taxes on solar-powered pumps and other drought-resilient technologies to incentivize their adoption. Number 6, implementation of tax reduction on or exemption system on irrigation equipment. 7, provision of subsidy for solar panel manufacturing and installation. Number 8, offering of tax breaks to solar companies, such as reduced income and the value-added tax. Last one, introduction of a net energy metering policy. Thank you.
Thank you. A big round of applause. Bronson Mutanda, thank you so much, Bronson. Please grab a seat. There's one at the end there. Right, again, he had lots of policy recommendations there in terms of what to do. But, Fidelis, it's now 4:20. The program says you have 30 minutes for your panel. Okay, so you have 30 minutes. It gets worse. 30 minutes for the panel and Q&A. So exactly 30 minutes, I will be saying in conclusion. All right. We also are moving the tea until later. We're not breaking for tea. Right, Fidelis, I leave it to you, sir. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and good afternoon, colleagues. We have had 4 presentations. The first one coming in from Secretary Magombo, looking at the energy policy issues. And then we also had the second one coming in from Douglas, who was looking at public expenditure policies to build resilience. And then the third one was from Fernandes, who was looking at how we can integrate Zimbabwe arrears and debt resolution process with climate finance. And then the last one was coming in from Bronson, who was looking at how fiscal interventions can build drought resilient communities. Now I've got 2 panelists, and I'm going to pivot to them so that they can then maybe comment on the presentations that have been made by the 5 presenters.
Thank you, session moderator. I've asked to go last. So Jimmy will speak first.
Thanks, moderator. So in terms of the legislation, I heard the recommendation for another commission on climate change. I'm not sure that we want another commission. We may want to just see as much as possible as to integrating the whole process of understanding the risks, climate management, as part of the new normal of doing business for both government and the private sector. Because obviously, as it's been emphasized, it's part of the risks that we're facing, and we need to be able to deal with it from all levels of business. And in that regard, I think it just becomes part and parcel of every ministry, every business's way of doing business, include climate assessments, climate risks, climate mitigations in all your projects. And as H.E. said in his speech, it's already mandatory now for state projects that there's a climate risk assessment. In terms of the debt for climate swaps, I think that's a very intriguing area. And it's an area where there's perhaps some low-hanging fruit that as a country we can harvest. So I like the recommendation that there is let's have a multidisciplinary committee within government to really explore that, because obviously it's a complex area, and we have to obviously be careful that we, A, take maximum advantage of the opportunities that are there, and B, that whatever we do provides value for money. At the same time, there does appear to be some real opportunities there, so let's definitely try and take advantage of it. Then in terms of the issues around communities, there was a lot of focus on drought and drought mitigation and drought protection. And I think we also need to add in the issues of flood. Because when you looked at some of the scenarios that were posted yesterday, flooding is perhaps a bigger risk, especially at the community level, than droughts. Because one of the forecasts, and I know the forecasts do have margins of error, but one of the forecasts was that parts of Zimbabwe will become much more prone to flooding. So let's also include the flood protection and flood mitigation as part of the strategies. And then let's see how we can have knowledge sharing between communities. Because as was also mentioned yesterday, there's a lot of historical indigenous knowledge around managing for climate, so we can leverage that for both drought protection and flood protection. Thank you.
Maybe before Mr. Moyo comes in, possibly, PS, you may want to respond to some of the issues that were raised by the subsequent presenters.
Thank you, moderator. Just a quick one on the issues of renewable energy. I would like to highlight that we do have a renewable energy policy which was launched in 2019 as a country. We have all those listed recommendations which are already operational within the country in terms of the Minister of Finance actually went on to, under the the Finance Act Amendment, to provide for all those incentives, tax breaks, the ability to import duty-free. We are already having a number of programs through the utility where they have signed MOUs to do assembly of solar panels, because manufacturing of solar panels, you can't do it cheaper than the Chinese. They have the best technologies to do that. It's more to do with, even India, I think they import most of the cells and then they assembly in their country. So we are moving towards that to ensure that we also create employment in the process. As a country, we have over 200 to 300 megawatts of solar, which is already installed in this country, both from commercial and industrial customers. In the farms, a lot of farms now have solar water pumping and for irrigation. Industries, they have installed a lot of commercial and industrial systems on their rooftops. If you go to Harare, Schweppes, we are looking at implementation of 35 megawatts of solar by Zimplats. It's already built. Another 30 megawatts by PP Cement in Bulawayo, which is going into construction now. So there's a lot of new capacity we expect, and what I'm happy about is that there's now buy-in from industry to come in and be part of the solution by bringing in the renewables, which is also helping them with their ESG requirements. So the other issue is that there's already a policy that as you build new dams, it's now a mandatory requirement to include a power generation facility. So you find that the dam which we are building here in Shangan will bring in also additional power generation. Tokom Kosi, we are putting in 15 megawatts, there will be 10 megawatts here. So I just thought it's important for me to add on those issues. There's the issue which was asked, I don't know whether you want me to speak to that on mandatory blending. Okay. Zimbabwe has been doing mandatory blending since 2013. There was a statutory instrument 17 of 2013. So we did that to allow up to 20%. In that statutory instrument, there was a provision which was targeting the border cities and towns where they can bring in fuel through road, and that fuel by road was exempt from mandatory blending. But what then happened was, even areas where there were blending facilities, even suppliers who had blending facilities used that road exemption to now bring fuel everywhere else and then not blend. Why are we blending? If you go to our NDCs, which were updated in 2021, blending is one of the mitigation strategies we're employing as government. Why? It means we have to plant huge plantations for sugar, which are huge carbon sink. They absorb a lot of carbon dioxide when we are producing that ethanol. And also, ethanol reduces the emissions from greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles. So there's always been an arrangement for exemptions administratively through the regulator in cases where, for I think, the boats which, because ethanol absorbs water, for boats which use petrol, those have always been exempted. So those provisions have always been there. So I guess if there are challenges, government can look at these issues administratively and find ways of how to address them. I think those were the key issues which, Chair, if I've left out something, you can just quickly remind me, but those are the ones I had captured.
Okay. Thank you very much to my colleagues for such insightful presentations. Just a few responses. I do agree with Jimmy. I don't think we need one more commission. I think we can do better just looking within and reorganizing ourselves. We already have one commission too many, and we can do ourselves. We already spoke about strain on the fiscus. A commission comes with, you know, with all sorts of costs. So I think we need to be careful. We have Competitions and Tariffs Commission, we have ZEDA, we have, you know, it can be housed in one of those, and we don't have to create a new structure. We just employ somebody who looks at it full time and get expertise there. I just feel that we need to be very careful with the issue of, you know, being very green. I think the president mentioned in his speech, you know, that we're jumping onto the bandwagon as small countries like Zimbabwe to solve climate problems. But I really think we mustn't be overzealous about greening everything, which is expensive, which we don't have endowments or expertise for. So I think to go back to some of our coal-powered stations, we must do it without shame and make sure that we get our power needs sorted. For me, the issue is not either or, it's and. So it's not choosing this one. It's on top of our thermal power, we add, you know, your green climate energy solutions. Because the reality, fundamentally, business is facing significant challenges on power right now as we speak. And I know, PS, that, you know, you've shifted us all onto prepaid for electricity, which I understand. I fully understand. I empathize, being a private sector person who also looks quite closely at what government is doing for quite a while now. So, and you're my sister, so I do empathize. But I do think we need to manage the transition practically. The transition is just too fast to go 1 month. And I'm talking something current within the next 60 days where you have to pay your August bill, your September bill, and prepay for your October. I think this is something that needs to be looked at, or else we're going to just precipitate a crisis which we don't have to create, in my humble view. So I will kindly ask you, PS, to maybe kindly reconsider. The other point I wanted to raise was the issue of land title. Land title for corporate farming in particular. In the tourism sector, this problem has been solved. You have 25-year concessions, which you can build a lodge in the falls and in different places, and for 25 years, you know, you can work on that and revenue and so on. But I think we need to migrate. Whilst we are solving the big 99-year lease issues and so on, I think we need a model for corporate agriculture. We talk about Delta, Tongaat. I like the Tongaat model a whole lot more, because Tongaat is involved in its own primary production. They own estates that produce the sugar that is then processed in their factories. And especially when we're talking about concepts of greening and having climate smart farming. And this has been done in other places. And I think to plug that in, to conjoin that value chain farming type initiatives by giving sound title. Maybe 25 years is too short for those kinds of things, especially when you want to recover. You could consider 30 years. I know my friend Sam, talks of 32 years, key rate duration, etc., etc. So if we have, that kind of horizon for corporate farming, I do believe that it will make a big difference, and perhaps we need to spend a bit more time. I'm not sure, Prof, where we are with the 99-year lease issue, because maybe I've been overtaken by events and the bankers are now happy we have bankable title. If I am, I'm willing to reconsider my submission. But I do think that there is a room for concession-type title for farming, in particular with corporates, whether it's in oil seeds, it's in cereals, or in grains. I do think that also on the small grains, I see an opportunity there
as mentioned before, to make the switch and the transition from maize alongside these climate smart type farming, which can also include communities, so that we have inclusive models that are based on climate smart farming at a communal level, translating into markets. The challenge we have is that we have communal farmers who struggle for scale. They cannot embark on meaningful transformative type agriculture because, you know, of the market design. And once we change the market design and you're producing into a market, I'm glad that a few development partners, a few NGOs are starting to talk about this. But what we need is a bit more energy, a bit more research and scale, and, Prof, of course, incentives, you know, to be able to do this. This is a new area. We're not taking away anything from the fiscus that's already there, but to say that it's a new area that we want to develop, and here are some incentives that corporates, that NGOs can participate in and really make a difference at the community levels. Because I think our policies, if we are not addressing the lowest of the low and making a difference at that level, we really haven't begun to transform the country. So whatever incentives we are creating should include communities, should plug into value chain play, but at a community level, and bring in the smallholder farmers in a real and meaningful way. And Prof, to be a little bit more magnanimous in terms of tax registration, because we still have that small issue where if you're buying as a corporate, I know you've done a lot of work in this area to raise the minimum by which a person needs to you know, minimum amount, I think it's $5,000 now worth of produce, which really makes a difference. And those are the kinds of things that really scratch where it itches in bringing a lot of these smallholder farmers into the mainstream economy. Thank you.
Thanks. Can I also put Jimmy on the spot? I think Fernandez raised an issue around debt for climate swaps. How feasible is it in the Zimbabwean context?
So, Fidelis, I don't know. Eh? I really don't know. It sounds, as I said, it sounds very intriguing. And I think it's definitely worth further exploration.
Yes, the thing is that we don't know because it needs to be contextualized in this debt resolution process. I think for what we could receive from the interviews that we had with different development partners, it is an option that they are willing to consider, but they need to see also some action from the government. So this commitment to structural reforms, that's what we heard from them. Also in terms of governance, so there is that willingness. They have this in the radar. They consider this option. It has been tried in different contexts, and well, the extent to that it can lead to substantial debt reduction, it really depends on what is being negotiated. In some cases, it can lead to an improvement of the payment conditions. But I think what we are trying to say with our policy brief is that currently there is this window of opportunity because industrialized countries are mandated to provide climate finance. There is this ongoing process where debt restructuring is discussed, and the country has done significant efforts to undergo climate planning. We have a whole of society plan backed up by government, by the private sector, by civil society, and also a pipeline of projects that could be subject to funding. These projects have been agreed with the Industrial Development Bank of Zimbabwe, and therefore I think this is a unique opportunity. Yeah. The question is, how do we articulate this dialogue? I think it takes two to speak, and this is what we're trying to promote.
Well, it's interesting anyway. Chair, do you want to just have a quick word before I open it up? Very quickly, or I open it up?
maybe this one is for Secretary Magombo. The issue of the net energy metering. Do we have a policy around this?
Yes, thank you. I think since 2017, we have had regulations on net metering, where anyone who has excess capacity can actually supply the grid. The biggest barrier we had over the years was the cost of the actual net metering, which has since been lifted off. Now you can apply, and the cost of the bidirectional meter will be supplied to you and then paid back over the period when you are supplying excess capacity to ZESA. And they are also considering the potential to actually pay out cash for customers who have additional capacity to feed to the grid. We have increased the capacity to net meter up to 5 megawatts. So if you have 5 megawatts installed capacity, you can be able to net meter, and we are doing this mainly for mining companies. We have companies and estates which have T estates. Tanganda has over 4 megawatt. Tech Mine has 4 megawatts plus, so they are able to net meter now. We have already mobbed up to 25 megawatts in net metering at the moment, which has already been incorporated into the grid, and we are asking for those who can do their systems to quickly apply to ZESA to be able to do that. The last item I want to bring in is related to net metering, but targeting farming communities. We want to ask farmers to move towards use of solar for their irrigation, so that they diversify on their revenues from farming. So you can do your solar to supply your center pivots during the time when you are irrigating. When you are not irrigating, you supply that power to the grid, and you still get paid for that power which we have actually installed. So we would want to engage Ministry of Finance to give incentives to these farmers, so that it also creates the resilience. In the year where there's no water, you then can actually be supplying solar to the grid as part of your revenue diversification. Thank you.
Thank you, PS. Okay, now I am going to again reiterate that if you ask a question, it has to be to the point and quick. Am I clear, please? Thank you. There's one here, one, and then Mishek, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wow, there's a lot of questions. But let's hurry up, please. Let's go.
Mine directed to my sister, PS Doc. So, you talked about the issue of potential once Muzarabani gas, etc. But I recall that Zeparu, maybe Dr. Jugumia can remind, there was a study that was done by Zeparu somewhere 2013-14, where it was an extensive about the potential of coal-bedded methane in the Wange area. So I'm just saying it's another study that was done. Secondly, yes, the song about Batoka, the records, if correct me, it started to be talked about in the 1970s. A feasibility study was done in 1993. Early 2000, there was also renewal of the issue, 2012, 2018. The Batoka has always been there. I'm not sure whether, where are we missing the point? You are talking about it again.
Excellent. So Batoka upgrade. Okay, there's another 2 there, please, and then we'll move over here. There's one at the back as well. Carry on, please.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Thank you to the panelists. Dr. Magombo, my question is, it's a worry. I don't know if it's a question. But I've noted that the implementation of the moving up the value chain to manufacturing is actually happening, and miners are required to do those quarterly export renewals while showing that they're actually implementing that policy. But my worry comes outside lithium. Let's look at black granite. In Mutoko, I think we already have 2 factories, but they are closed because they can't export the finished product. Okay. So I'm asking about the actual strategy that we are having to ensure the success of it. I also hear that some lithium miners say we already have plant outside here, so we can't come up and set it here when we already have plant where we are coming from. So how are we really looking and strategizing for this, I think, challenge coming
Thank you, Mishek. next to you. Thank you.
Thank you to all the presenters. My question is to Mr. Msebenzi. He talked about cloud seeding, but I'm a bit worried on that. It's like if you've got your cow, which is not, it doesn't have a calf, then you are going to decide to give it salt so that, you know, you can get some milk out of it. That's the situation that we have.
Okay.
All we are saying is, it's not all clouds that can produce rainfall. And also the winds we feel near in the lower atmosphere, in the upper atmosphere are different. You may see the clouds right here in Victoria Falls, but the speed of the winds will move that cloud and then it will rain when it is in Wangi. When we look at cloud seeding, I'm not sure what signs we want to apply so that we think that is going to allow agriculture to thrive. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think you're the expert, so thank you for that comment. Petido, I'm coming there, sir. Let's start here, these two, and then don't worry, I don't miss you. Karen, be to the point, please. Is it on? Is the light on? Sorry. Well, sorry. I know I'm rushing. Yeah, now talk. Yeah, thank you.
Right, Douglas. I think we are emitting we are emitting less than South Africa. So my question is, why did you choose South Africa? Do you want us to follow what South Africa is doing to emit more? Because I don't understand why choosing South Africa, because we are emitting less than.
There we go. Why are we using South Africa? Next, madam.
Thank you. My name is Erin Achipumo from Zepari. My question goes to the UNDP presentation. If I got him correctly, he said we have as available resources towards climate adaptation 2.9 billion, which combines the domestic and the international financing against the target of 14.9 billion. So what we have at the moment is only 19.5%, but we are supposed to reduce 40% of emissions by 2030. So are we likely to really meet that? And then to Engineer Magombo, you mentioned the issue of failing to have bankable projects. Is it because we don't have financing, or is it the capacity issues? Thank you.
Thank you. Right at the back there, please.
Thank you. To the Minister of Finance, my name is Pep Kai from UNICEF. To the Minister of Finance, do we have a dedicated unit or dedicated structures within the ministry to track development finance in the ministry, so that we identify, measure, and track public expenditure, both historically and in current terms, at both national and subnational levels? If not, then instead of what my brother proposed, Mr. Msebenzi, that we create a commission responsible for climate change or climate financing, why don't we establish this dedicated unit within the Ministry of Finance to be able to do that, so that we ensure efficiency and effectiveness in climate financing driven by decision making? And also, just to highlight that of the little resources that we are dedicating towards climate financing, only 2.4% are reaching or are supporting initiatives that support children. Yet, children are 7.1 million, 47% of the population. So just to support what my brother, Mr. Mzite, said, that we need to make sure that children's voices are also considered in decision making, and also to ensure that the budget has resources, and to ensure timely release of the resilient social protection financing, be it education, health, and food, to mitigate the stressors, and also to ensure that we reduce child labor, migration, or early marriages if we support them through social protection. Thank you.
Okay, UNICEF, thank you. Of course, we need to look after children too. Right, one there, and then finally we'll finish with you, Honourable, and then we'll open it up.
Thank you very much, Andy. I think very insightful contributions today from our speakers. I think in terms of legislation, whilst there were no graphs, we appreciate that, but I think it's important for us to also be looking at the competitiveness of our legislation. Essentially, we're saying as a country, whatever we're putting in our policy and legislation will determine the level to which we can attract foreign climate finance investment into Zimbabwe. And I think it's also then important for us to understand the scale and scope of that climate finance opportunity. And so whilst, yes, we are looking at the cost of greening our industries and mining operations, I think we cannot miss sight of the opportunity that can be unlocked and being able to link climate finance to all our economic activities, whether it's through the carbon tax. I'm not sure if PS would like to touch on that. But also looking at, Mr. Moyo, you mentioned to say we need both. It's not either or. But whilst we are still using coal and other high emission products, can we then be looking at establishing emissions trading schemes or some way of ensuring that we are generating some funding towards ensuring the sustainability of our operations? And I think my last question,
please,
Andy, last question or comment, and perhaps it would be to Raul Fernandez, to say, you know, you mentioned to say Africa received 30 billion. My understanding is we received 30 out of 653 billion. So what is it that we can do as Zimbabwe to then position ourselves to be able to unlock the climate finance opportunity? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honourable, the last question, and then I'll give you some time limits, Chair, on how quickly we have to answer. Honourable?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, mine is not a question. Yeah, someone spoke about amendment to the Public Finance Management Act. Yeah, I just wanted to say, when the President presented his State of the Nation address, as part of the Parliament legislative agenda, there is the amendment to the Public Finance Management Act. And we are working on this. And what we have done so far is to align the Public Finance Management Act to the SADC model law on public finance management. And this is work in progress. We have already done the principles, and all these are now before the Attorney General's office. But once this process is done, it will come to Parliament, and I think as we debate in Parliament, we should be able to incorporate climate financing as proposed. But this is an issue that is going to be debated in Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable. If I may then, Chair, you have one more question? Okay.
Thank you, Moderator. No, this is just a comment for Mr. Fernandez. So, you know, the idea of the debt for climate swap is very interesting, but we have to look at the feasibility in the context of Zimbabwe's debt. So obviously it's not possible in the case of multilateral debt to the World Bank, to the African Development Bank, and indeed the EIB. It's very unlikely. Bilateral is perhaps possible. So what I may suggest is perhaps if you can collect all your examples and come and talk to us, because the gentleman who's dealing with debt, Mr. Bumbe, unfortunately had to leave. But if your proposals are interesting and serious and feasible, I think we would like to understand them and we would like to take them on board. So that's my suggestion.
Excellent.
I would, so don't respond to that issue here. Let's do it bilaterally. Thank you.
Chair, you have until literally 5 o'clock to finish, because that when I'm closing the doors. So please go ahead, and each person will have only literally a minute to answer.
Okay. Let me start with the Secretary Magomba. I think you've got quite a number of questions, some coming in from Professor Makocha.
Yeah. Thank you, Moderator. The first one was on the CBM. In terms of that, we have a resource. For years, we have been speaking about it. CBM has failed to raise financing for it to be developed further. One of the reasons is because it uses fracking, and usually because of the existence of the gas within the seams, which need an energy-intensive way of extracting it. But the way it can come out where we have it, they just need investors to come in. And I'm aware that one of the CBM projects, they're in negotiation with ZPC to try and put up a power generation plant there to produce, so that they prove the resource. Okay. So something is happening there. But with gas, in terms of natural gas, it's a much easier gas to extract and transport and convert. Then the second one, and also gas, natural gas is also agreed to as a transitional fuel. On Batoka, yes, we have had feasibility studies, 1972, updated 93, 2012. We went on to try and procure a developer in 2018 when we had already initiated a procurement process. We had to cancel that as a way when we were looking at the expediting the implementation. It didn't work, unfortunately, because the procured developer could not raise finance at a reasonable cost. It brought in huge costs to the projects. We've gone back to the drawing board. We're updating the feasibility, also in line with the resilience, because we might resize it to a level which is related to the reduction of the water within the basin.
Okay.
And then moving up the value chain is the question from, yes, there is more which needs to be done. In countries where it's been successful, it has been because there were certain other, like the president said, we need infrastructure. For us to move up the value chain, we then need the energy to do so. So the precursor to this value chain movement for strategic energy minerals is the fact that there is a transition which has resulted in huge demand for the transition minerals. So the market is there. So I think as a country, we now need to look into the policies to say what are the industrial policies we can put in to ensure that we get maximum value for the value addition. Also looking at the market size and where is our market and how we can ensure that we get some form of value. It's moving up that value chain I showed you, maybe up to precursor. We might not be able to go up to the electric vehicles, but some people have done it. Like Indonesia, they're now looking at precursor, they're doing the cathodes, but they only have nickel. But now they're consolidating other minerals.
Next question.
Bankable projects was the next question. We do have a lot of bankable projects. The reason why the projects have not gone into financial closure is because of the perceived country risk, especially for large projects. A lot of people have not been willing to bring in the monies, mainly because they want assurance and guarantees from government on the ability to convert their money back into US dollars and for them to pay back their loans and also dividends as investors. Right. So we have proposed some structure where they can sell to other consumers who can pay in the requisite currency, and also with government offering a back-to-back arrangement. So there's some program we are working on as government to address this issue. We are not short of bankable projects. We are short of an environment. Investors want assurance that once they invest, they'll be able to bring out their money. Then the last one is on the issues of climate finance. I agree with you, we need competitive legislation, but we also need to go back to what Busisa said. We are going to continue using coal as one of our resources, but we are going to look at we want you, especially the academics, to look at the issue of how to improve the sequestration of carbon coming from coal plants. Right. So that we become compliant and we can achieve net zero. And one of it is by increasing agricultural production, which can absorb the carbon dioxide. Thank you.
Right, sorry, I have to jump in there. Okay, we had another question, I think, at the end there, Pepe Kai, in terms of children and setting up an office in the Ministry of Finance. I think that's probably something to look at, and obviously children are important, so obviously
maybe
we need to put them in our plan.
To our Department of International Cooperation.
Okay, all right, well, we'll talk about that, but yes, I think it's a good point, and I'm sure people will look at, obviously, the impact on children, because they are important. They're our future, so why not? Right, Mishek, you've answered your question? Did? Okay. There was a question...
There was a question on why South Africa.
Yep, why South Africa? very quickly, without getting into histrionics. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think I thought I answered it in my first presentation.
Answer now, please, without explaining. Answer. Answer.
This was a legal problem, so I was comparing the country with a similar legal background. That was the essence of that.
Okay, all right. So we're talking maybe English law or something like that, because yep. Okay, that'll do for me. Thank you. Right, the final question, if I'm not mistaken, talking there, I think a lot to you, Raul.
So quickly, there was another question around meeting the climate targets. I think it is unlikely, but we don't know. We know that implementation is a major challenge, and this is caused by lack of finance. But what I can say is that we are at the stage of creating an institutional framework for achieving the future targets. There are some promising developments, but I would encourage the Ministry of Finance to establish a dedicated unit on climate finance. There has been a launch of the promise as a tool to track development assistance, and this can be linked to climate finance as well. There will be a climate change fund with the enactment of the climate bill. This is a promising development and needs to be operationalized and keep capitalized. And finally, the disaster risk finance strategy that is being developed can provide the foundation for adaptive social protection in the country. And to conclude, why Africa receives less funding, first of all, there is no fiscal space. Some solutions have been discussed this morning, and I think they are very pertinent. Development partners need to do their bit in terms of providing the funding that is mandated by the Paris Agreement. And also private sector needs to be engaged. I think the Zimbabwean government needs to elevate climate change as a matter of national security, and this will help building the trust around this agenda and the relationship with the development partners for the mobilization of concessional funding.
Thank you. That was a good 30 seconds. Chair, you literally have 30 seconds to wind up before I close it.
Maybe just to thank our presenters and also panelists and also contributors from the floor. I thank you so much.
Brilliant. Please give a big round of applause for our panelists. Now, please remain seated. It's fine. I'd just like to say to all of you watching on Zim Papers TV Network and all other channels, Ministry of Information, UNDP, and Ministry of Finance websites, please tune in 9 a.m. tomorrow morning for our day 4 of Zedcon 2024. There's more to watch, and it is your conference. We'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye to all of you on TV. Thank you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big round of applause to our panelists. Dr. Gloria Magombo, Permanent Secretary. Doctor, you can go off. Obviously, we've got Mr. Musa Benzi Douglas. Thank you. We've got Raul Fernandez.